Welcome to the Voice of Retail for the week of September 16th, 2019. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. In this week's episode, I'm on the road recording interviews in the Bahamas, where I was a keynote speaker at Bluetech's Vartech conference. Thanks there to Michelle and Penny for their generous hosting. And now recording live at the Global eCommerce Leaders Forum in New York City in the Purolator podcasting studio. For this episode, I reach all the way out to Vancouver and chat with retailer Indochino CEO Drew Green. We catch up and talk about their impressive 40% year-over-year growth numbers that have made them one of Canadian businesses ranked fastest growing retailers in their recent rankings, what it takes to maintain that level of growth and keep the customers coming back. Next, I chat with veteran retail brand marketer Patrick Dickinson and talk about retail marketing tradecraft, the complexities of managing multiple brands and concepts in modern retail, and the nature of crowds, or lack of them, creating challenges for traditional store traffic models. Lastly, I'll take a look at the retail news of the week, but first, let's listen to my interview with Drew Green. And a quick note, gremlins and a not-so-super-great mobile connection stepped a little bit on my recording with Drew, so you might hear an occasional beep that I was unable to edit out. Otherwise, fantastic interview, enjoy, and I'll talk to you a little later.
Drew, welcome to the Voice of Retail. How are you today?
You know what? I'm doing great, man. It's nice to be speaking with you.
You and I have known each other for many, many years, and I think last time I saw you, I was in your offices in Vancouver. I had the opportunity to interview Peter Housley, but you and I have never chatted for the podcast, so this is a real treat for me.
You know what? It's a treat for me as well, man. I appreciate you having me on, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, so you've got some news. I want to get to that in a minute, but for those who may or may not know a little bit about you and may not know about Indochino, I think there's a few people left who aren't 100% knowing about Indochino. Could you give us a sense of your personal journey and then a bit about Indochino, the retailer?
Yeah, absolutely. So just really quickly on me, I mean, I'm an entrepreneur, man. I've been an entrepreneur now for over 20 years. First company was really privileged to be part of, and we sold at DoubleClick. I was head of retail for many years at DoubleClick, which eventually sold to Heller Freeman and then Google. And from there, built out shop.com. It was sold to Market America 4 years later. Built out shop.ca. After that, was able to build that business in over $200 million market cap. Mm-hmm. And then eventually bought it back. It's now part of Emerge Commerce, which I'm chairman and founder of. And about 4.5 years ago, was able to really partner with a couple firms to essentially buy Indochino and reimagine what it could be. And so, Indochino is not a startup. We've been around since 2007. Mm-hmm. But it's in a way what we call a restart-up. The business had been online only for many years and had sort of tested retail in a pop-up format. But we really wanted to take what was a niche brand and create a global brand. And we've done that. We're the largest apparel brand now in the world. Recently, as of last week, we're announced as the third fastest growing retailer in Canada, 13th fastest growing company in Canada with revenues over $100 million. And so it's been an amazing 4+ years, and we're even more excited about the future. But it's been a really good journey so far.
Well, and in fact, what kind of initiated my call to you, amongst just being able to catch up, was this news you had. So Canadian Business and Maclean's did some surveying, and there's a couple of metrics in there. So tell me how exactly you came out. I think you just said your fastest growing business in Canada, right? One of the fastest growing businesses in Canada. 4
key data points that Canadian Business released last Thursday on Indochino. The first is that out of all companies in Canada, we're one of the 500 most fastest growing. And so we ranked 239 amongst all companies at any size in Canada. But when you break that list apart, what we saw was we're the 13th fastest growing company, which amongst companies that have over $100 million in revenue. And then when you look at retailers, we're the third fastest growing retailer amongst retailers with over $100 million in revenue. And then the last one is that we're the fastest growing retailer with revenues outside of Canada, so growing internationally, the U.S. and et cetera. And so some really, really proud stats for the team, and I just couldn't be more proud of everything they've done here.
Well, it's a phenomenal accomplishment when you think of just growing the business. What would you say? 4.5 years. You've reimagined it just 4.5 years ago, but many Canadian businesses have not been so successful going south. Several notable, actually, Vancouver businesses who are very successful as well. You've got some good company in Vancouver, Aritzia, Lululemon, Sage, many. But what do you think is the what's the formula to success in the American market? Is it any different than the Canadian market? I mean, the showrooms, as I see them, the concept looks the same. But so what do you attribute that kind of success to? Such a competitive market. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think I think it is tough for Canadian brands and, all kinds of consumer brands to really break out internationally. And of course, the U.S. is hyper competitive. Mm-hmm. I think for us, key to success really is the differentiated approach we've taken. So our showrooms are really engaging, and they're quite different than, our competitors in terms of how they interact with customers. Our entire focus is on fit and personalization and customization of the garment. And it's quite fun. I think one of the most interesting stats over the last 4 years is that over half of our transactions are repeat purchase. And so the business has this incredible following that, is extremely loyal to the brand, that continues to come back again and again. And, that's been a really big part of, not only our success growing internationally, but also, just the health of the business. I mean, we were a business that, we were losing $8 million US a year in 2014. And this year we're profitable and maintain growth and accelerated growth, actually. So yeah, I think the differentiated approach we've taken to retail has been really important. Of course, online is still the majority of our business and our biggest store, quote unquote.
You mentioned a couple of things, and it's kind of a nice segue into my question. And I kind of asked you the same question on the main stage at Retail Council of Canada store last year, but with the torrid growth that you're at pace at, and you're getting 50% return customers, how do you hire for that? How do you manage to operationally sustain quality in growth? And this is the question that many retailers, whether they're growing one store or 10, how do you maintain consistency? How do you hire the right people? How do you keep the right people? I mean, you're not going to cover off the ball. Any tips or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think there's a lot there. I mean, we could probably talk about people for over an hour just because of how important it is to any business and specifically what our plan is. I think, when I look at our success, it is purely driven off the people that we have in the business, the board, the shareholder group we have. And, the one thing is just complete alignment to what our goals are, and really staying focused on execution and not letting distractions come in the way of what we want to do. Continuity is a key word in response to your question because, we've got a management team that's been together for some time now, right? There's a couple people I retained from the earlier days, and, we've built out this incredible management team from, companies like Lululemon and Microsoft and a whole bunch of others that just have incredible experience to bring to the company. And when you have a strong management team, that believes in the vision, that's focused, that's working their tail off, so to speak, that goes throughout the organization. I think at the store level, you said it, right? Like one of the biggest risks we have these last 4 years, as we went from kind of 0 to now 50 showrooms, how are we going to hire? How are we going to train? How are we going to retain the right people? Has certainly been a focus, and I think that middle one has been really important. The amount of training that we do, the amount of support that we give our staff, and the decision making we make. We want to make sure we have the right people in the business, and so we give it our all in terms of supporting someone coming into the business. But we're also very quick to look for fit and make sure we have the right fit.
You're experts on fit. Last question for you. How are you feeling about the retail season ahead, both in the U.S. and Canada? And what's ahead for Indochino? Is something different about the assortment and, growth? So give us a sense, first of all, of how you're feeling. In the American retail industry is putting in some big numbers, but, is there any fear that, that ride might come to an end? The consumer seems pretty resilient. In Canada, it's pretty spiky, right? Retail's okay, but it's not doing what the U.S. is. And then, again, if you could give us a sense of what's in the near future for the business.
Yeah, I was on Bloomberg a few months ago talking about just retail in general and some of the risks and some of the opportunities. And, retail has gone through a little bit of a lag, especially in the U.S. in 2019. We haven't seen it in our business. We've, maintained our growth rate over 40% year over year. I think we're 42 year to date. And I'm very bullish on, the rest of the year, at least for our business. I think that, we continue to see an adoption of the product expansion we've brought to market. So, whether that be khakis or casual shirts, or greater selection of customizations and personalizations for suiting. This week we have a historic launch where we've tested outerwear for two fall-winter seasons now in a row in a limited fashion, quote unquote. We are going very big this year, and so we've got an outerwear launch that brings 32 new outerwear products to our consumers, both existing and the many new that will join us. And so I'm really excited about that. Next week we launch our 50th showroom, which is, a really nice milestone for the business. We've got another 20 showrooms between now and, call it Q2 of next year that we're launching. And we've got some interesting partnerships that we're in discussion on. And so, I'm really, really excited about, what we've done, where we're at. But frankly, our best years are ahead of us in terms of, further expansion and profitable growth.
Well, it's exciting to hear, and I wish you continued success. And I want to, get ahead and invite you back in maybe into the podcast later in the year and check in and see how the business is going. But for now, thanks so much for joining me on The Voice of Retail, Drew. It's always a pleasure to catch up and a real treat to talk to such a savvy, successful retailer.
You know what? I just love talking to you, man. So, yeah, it's really great to hear your voice, and I look forward to talking again soon.
Patrick, welcome to The Voice of Retail. How are you today?
Very well, thanks, Michael.
Well, thanks for making time to join me today. You and I have known each other, I would say, probably back to 2000 when we were together at HBC. But could you give us a sense for the listeners of your professional journey and a little bit about you and your role in retail?
Absolutely. I guess I came to both retail and marketing in a roundabout way. I started off in the retail advertising side of things at J. Walter Thompson and took that kind of as a specialty. I moved across to SMW and Publicis. So a good 13 years or so on the ad side of the business. And a lot of that, obviously, there was definitely financial services and CPG and packaged beverages and all that kind of good stuff. But I managed to kind of maintain a real focus on retail and direct-to-customer, customer service type of clients throughout that time. And so took that expertise and turned it into a couple of different companies, small boutique agencies and consultancies that I ran, which serviced the retail industry. And from there, that's when I really ended up at Hudson's Bay, initially running as a general manager for all of their external advertising for all of the brands that we had at that point, which was Zellers and Home Outfitters and the Bay and even the Olympics, which was kind of a separate assignment.
Fields even back then, right?
Yeah, lots of banners. And then about a year and a half, 2 years after I got there, there was the big restructure, which saw them break those component banners back into their operating silos, which probably certainly helped Hudson's Bay. And I spent about the last 11 years really running that specifically from a marketing standpoint.
So deep experience on the front lines and from strategy. So I wanted to talk about the tradecraft of brand management. I mean, you highlighted the fact that you've worked with and around big businesses, big retailers with multi-banners, always a challenge in trying to create cohesiveness where it matters and differentiation where the customers feel it. But how do you approach building distinctive brands in modern day retail? That's a big question. But how do you think about that with your experience at one of North America's premier big brands and oldest companies?
Well, you're right. I mean, it is absolutely a complex marketing puzzle. And I have to admit, the retail marketing, it was the complexity of the whole program that really attracted me to it in the first place. And it's because that complexity is based on having to manage these polar opposites. You've got the very tactical and promotional, which you've got to figure out a balance with your image and differentiation, as you say. You've got your traditional and like the most traditional kind of paper flyers against the most new and innovative, being e-commerce and all of the digital assets that requires. So you're really dealing with the yin and the yang of marketing to try to come up with this comprehensive whole. And as with most brand building, you have to start from that point of reality in terms of your position in the market. And from a retail standpoint, that's really always going to be based on what is the product that you sell. I know there's a lot of concentration these days on the retail experience, and certainly there is an absolute premium that we have to give to delivering on a great physical experience. But by and large, the product that you sell still is going to define you in terms of your overall market position. So you got to start there. And once you've developed that messaging and that content into what can be a clear and simple and compelling differentiation in terms of why shop there versus someone else, then that even more tactical and more scientific part of the job comes into play, which is, of course, the distribution of that message to a target that is going to take it and run with it and actually be engaged and do something with it. So, again, it's a question of knocking down the things in order that you've got to sort out, and then being very, very clear and focused as you execute in the marketplace with them.
Well, let's take a minute and unpack that part about product, because you're absolutely right. The experience can be spot on, but if the product value proposition and assortment isn't right, you're not going to last very long. How did you work with your counterparts, your counterparts in merchandising? What was that? When I worked in retail, for example, at the shopping channel, I'd get to know their business, they'd get to know mine, and really would help me in some ways. They would look to marketing to help shape how they viewed and what product they should look for. And at the same time, they would go and find, of course, being savvy retailers themselves, product. How did that dynamic work for you over your career and in your experience?
Well, I would agree with you. I think you really have to be intimately connected to the product, and typically that is through the merchants that you work with. And it is a give and take. There's never a merchant who thinks they get enough support of the finite pie of marketing that is out there to be divvied up. So you are dealing with that dynamic. However, to your point, they are often looking for guidance in terms of what we would call at Hudson's Bay the point on the spear. Merchants and all businesses tend to. You kind of default to those higher volume opportunities and the sales dollars that come with them. And yet, counterintuitively, many times that is not the thing that you want to talk about. You do want to talk about those things that are smaller, more rarefied, potentially have a limited shelf life or a limited distribution, because that's really what tweaks the interests of the customer out there. And done properly, taking a number of those things that are special, different, and unique will get you the kind of mass audience and exposure you want. You really need to resist the temptation to go with the biggest volume driving, Crest toothpaste 24/7. You need to find something new and different to put in front of the customer when you've got a strategy that says differentiation is part of what you're trying to appeal to them on.
Well, there's no question. Some of my most dynamic conversations with the merchants were on, I as you try to build your brand defining, brand enhancing assortment. At the same time, they've got numbers to hit, and they say, "Listen, I can move a lot of this number, and it'll help me hit the mark." It may or may not be what you want for the brand, though. So that's where the conversation gets so interesting, eh?
It really does. And it's changed over the years. And I really see it as there's an ebb and a flow to these things where, quite often you'll have retailers that really are hitting their stride and they're talking about those things that may be smaller, maybe not quite the volume opportunity, but do that great job of defining themselves. And then typically what happens is the growth imperative takes over because you're starting to put on numbers on big increases. The law of large numbers gets you into that point where you start going back to the tried and true. So it's always a challenge to, within the tried and true and within the growth that you have to deliver, we always had to be looking for something different. I mean, there's a reason why, grocers aren't constantly giving you milk and juice on the front cover all the time. There has to be something that differentiates you and makes you go to the next grocer because you want that unique ingredient. You need that special or different finished product that you've heard so much about that everyone's serving. Those are the things that can cause a trip to be made or a trip to be adjusted. So the resistance to base modeling is something that in retail marketing, typically you're sometimes the only guy who's carrying that flag.
Let's talk about another type of volume, and that's store traffic. So I talk to retailers every day, and there's no question that store traffic is tough to come by, it's tough to grow, and for many, store traffic is going in one fairly steady direction, and that's downwards. Now, whether some degree that's an Amazon effect of shopping online, I think that could be overstated. That's often the kind of default answer, but you've got a slightly different or a very different kind of idea that has a broader context that you shared with me. Tell us more about how you think about driving store traffic and where and why that can be challenging.
Well, it goes to, you're right, there's a higher order change, I believe, happening in the market right now. And it really has to do with crowds and how you attract them. If the 20th century was the century of crowds, then the 21st is the century of the digital crowd. I don't think the nature of crowds has changed, and there's certainly been lots of work from a sociological standpoint of the nature of crowds and how they can be manipulated into doing good or bad things. And there's a lot of there is a lot of research on how crowds affect each other and how they're formed and what they tend to do when they get together. But what I see happening is there are fewer and fewer actually physical crowds. And you'll notice that on the street. You notice that in shopping malls. You notice that in grocery stores. You notice that even in restaurants occasionally. I really believe that crowds now, so much of crowd forming and conversing and reinforcing happens online. You find your crowd, you hang out with your crowd, you relate stories, and you push interested topics amongst the crowd. And a lot of that is done in the digital world. And as a result, there's a real deficit of physical crowds and physical groups that are like-minded and would tend to congregate, even for everyday types of trips to grocery stores, trips out for dinner, because many of these things can all be at least expedited with digital, and therefore from the comfort of your residence, and it is being reinforced by a crowd that shops, thinks, and behaves the same way. So I think we're heading for increased challenges for anyone who is reliant on physical locations, who does not have that really strong differentiating reason why it might be worth a trip.
It's a really great insight, and it's a great puzzle to be unlocked. So let me talk about another puzzle to be unlocked. You've spent the past decade plus in the department store format. What's is there different ways to measure success? I mean, ultimately, you're measuring success by the sales, but there's talk about measuring experiences per square foot and all these things. What's the future for department store retail in North America?
Well, I think the problem with measuring it other than in sales is ultimately the market measures it in sales, in terms of comp store sales, year-over-year sales. And whether you choose to generate those sales with a much more robust online offering, which is definitely a strategy that's working for some of the larger players we've seen both here and in the US, or whether you choose to address increasing sales with somehow, addressing the challenges we just talked about the lack of crowds and lack of traffic, you have to, you absolutely have to be able to do that. And it looks like that model on the low end, in terms of the Targets and Walmarts and Amazons of the world, is based on extremely robust e-commerce offerings, which are an absolute best price proposition.
Mm-hmm. And efficient, right? And they're relentlessly efficient, right?
They're not efficient. And part of the problem with the traditional department store is the scarcity of capital, because of the need to both maintain and build your physical space while building out these incredibly costly networks, not just technologically, but from a supply chain, from a computerization and AI standpoint. The big players in e-commerce, they see a new technology and they'll just buy it. I mean, they have so much capital sort of saved up in their bankroll that they if something intrigues them, they buy the company and they start putting all of that brainpower to work right inside. Whereas department stores don't have that luxury. They're still searching for vendors and for the best way to get a company to come in and help them with this, even with companies that have very, very large IT departments, other than the very, very largest. It does come down to innovation and differentiation. If you're anywhere outside of that price proposition sort of end of the famous, U-shaped graph with price proposition on one side and specialization and differentiation on the other, the middle of the saddle is getting bigger, though, with fewer players at the bottom and a lot of different higher-end players at the top.
We've been talking about in the past little while that gravity still matters. I mean, there's a lot of competitors in the retail space that are running what may be unsustainable models, but they sure do suck up a lot of oxygen in terms of attention and media and even market dollars. And I think that's one of the challenges. Let's call them traditional retailers, but I don't think traditional retailers exist anymore. Everyone's playing in the modern space. But your point about innovation and base, unit economics still matter, right? And so it's a really interesting competitive set. And I guess the struggle is how to not get caught in that middle where you have the worst of both worlds. You have an okay e-commerce offering and you now have an okay assortment, and the store traffic is declining. So I guess all this comes together being it's challenging days for the department store. I still have confidence that physical retail has a great role in retail. But it'll be interesting to see how these things all sort themselves out.
Absolutely. I mean, you've got this, there's the old business school case of, what do you do against the irrational spender? And really, a lot of traditional retail is forced into that kind of paradox right now where, a Wayfair is going to outspend everybody in that housewares and home furnishings category in this country, and yet they're losing $500 million a year. So part of it is, do you chase them? How far? And if you don't chase them, how far can you survive if you're going to play the waiting game and see if the market finally gives up and capitulates on funding this seemingly unprofitable venture ad infinitum?
Well, I think, and I'm sure you would join me in wishing everyone the best in trying to figure that out. And you too are trying to figure that out. So for those that would like to chat with you a bit further, how do people get in touch with you, Patrick?
I've got an email. It's Patrick Dickinson 033 at Gmail, and I'm happy if anyone wants to drop me a line. The intellectual debate is always interesting, and the practical application is always even more so.
Oh, fantastic. Well, listen, thanks so much for joining me on The Voice of Retail. Great conversation. Really such a treat to catch up with you. Again, you and I have known each other for a long time, and every time we speak, I learn something. So thanks again, and I wish you a great week.
Fantastic. Likewise, Michael. Great to catch up with you too.
Well, all right. Thanks to Drew and Patrick for being my guests this week. And now let's hit the highlights from Retail This Week e-newsletter, biggest retail weekly in Canada. You can subscribe on retailcouncil.org for free. I put that together each and every week, kind of a compendium of top retail stories and also a kind of curated look at what's interesting. So let's kick it off. In the news this week, interestingly, mall makeover at Garden City. So this from the Winnipeg Free Press. Former Sears store makes its way for 6 new tenants. So this is a theme we've seen across the country with the repurposing of a large physical space into multiple spaces. So landlords being clever about what and how they're creating. By the way, keep your eye out for the mall report. The Retail Council of Canada is putting out another edition of the shopping mall report for 2019. That should be in market later in the fall, so be sure and keep your eye out for that. Again, this article from the Winnipeg Free Press. From Retail Insider, Craig Patterson's Retail Insider, Hermes store opens impressive flagship in Vancouver. 5,000 square feet of retail space, twice as much whatever was there before, according to the article at Burrard and Alberni. I was in Alberni. I was in Vancouver a couple of weeks ago, so I saw the space just prior to opening. It's quite impressive, makes quite a statement on the corner, so to be sure and check it out. And speaking of statements on the corner, Italy is finally almost ready to arrive. It's been a long journey for the Italy brand as they worked to find the right partners and the right space. This from the Globe and Mail talks about this. 50,000 square feet, 3 floors opening up on Bloor Street in the Manulife Centre. So lots of work going on there. It's very exciting. First Italy store in Canada. So much awaited. It's been a long journey, many, many years, and finding the right partners. So we wish them well on their grand opening. From the Globe and Mail, Couche-Tard wants to be a key player in the North American cannabis market. So Couche-Tard, such a fantastic business, really has the heft to make retail cannabis really work. They've got a bunch of and sticks together a bunch of strategic alliances already, and of course, Couche-Tard would already be quite familiar with selling age-gated, so to speak, product with tobacco and whatnot. So they're prime in that market. So we wish them best. We'll see how that works out. Strategy Magazine. This is from Strategy Magazine. Canadians expect to keep holiday spending steady. The title's actually a bit deceptive. It's not really about holiday spending. It's about when they're going to start spending. This from 200 respondents, so not exactly a robust sample, but interesting nonetheless. Of course, this year, the Black Friday holiday, U.S. Thanksgiving, is a week later. It's on the 29th versus the 23rd in 2018. So we'll see how that shakes out in terms of what consumers do for the month of November and what retailers do to try to activate them in advance of that late start to Black Friday. Let's see what else we got. Sebastian Prince from Retail Council of Canada, Ontario Director, in the news talking about lifting of daytime restrictions on delivery. So that, if we think about it, daytime deliveries cause a lot of congestion to retailers, and retailers on the whole would like to be more efficient delivering those. So there's a pilot going on. Check that out from CTV. Check that out in Ontario as they try to do a pilot for extending late night deliveries. I'm in New York City today. You see a lot of late night deliveries because that's the best time to get around, though it is always crowded in the streets, it seems, 24/7. Great article from Retail Council of Canada, drawing party lines where Canadian political parties stand. So there's a whole in-depth article in site talking about Retail Council's perspective on where and what the issues are from retail's perspective. So be sure and check that out. Great for conversations on the doorstep. Retail around the world, Casper CBD gummies. So fantastically interesting story about earning the category of sleep. So this from Fast Company. Casper CBD gummies here to help you sleep. So I guess a mattress isn't just good enough. So interesting work there. Target's big growth in small formats. So from Progressive Grocer and lots of the content coming out of Grocery Shop, which is Shop Talk's grocery event in Vegas happening this past week, and Target talking about how they're growing their assortment, so to speak, or how they're growing their small format stores. Pandora plots comeback. So this one is close, near and dear to my heart, so to speak. I was at Pandora for about 6 months a couple of years ago, helping them run their marketing. They ran into a pretty big rough patch. Their stock lost 2/3 of its value in the past 16 months, but new CEO, top management, new designers, so onwards and upwards for the brand Pandora. So we wish them well, of course. Under independent news for retailers, it's interesting. More than 200 cannabis stores, this is from the Calgary Herald, approved in Calgary. So the city says that's the market limit, and that's a lot of stores. So what's interesting, what I find the most interesting is now you're getting, particularly in Alberta and less so in Ontario, for example, is you're now starting to get retailers who need to compete. So it's not about a shortage of retail space, it's about competition. So this retail innovator here, independent retailer who owns a retail cannabis store, talking about, longer hours, maybe some discounts. It is where they say the rubber hits the road. What else? We say goodbye to David's Shoes. So David's an institution on Mi'kmaq. This is from the kit. And it is unfortunately closing, and some other stores that it has. So that didn't work out as planned, but whatever comes next, we wish them and everyone connected to it well. Spotlight on retail prevention. Loss prevention. Spotlight on loss prevention. Some active shooter incidents in the Cross-Iron malls close to Calgary. So a bit of chaos there. So we'll keep a close eye on that, and we're starting to see, of course, more and more of that. Westmount food owners concerned by escalation in thefts and violence in stores. And Vancouver bookstore receives unexpected packages. So I guess people are shipping drugs or putting their address on as a return address. So they're finding some unusual packages, to say the least, being delivered. Spotlight in digital retail, just wanted to focus out of Canadian Retail Magazine. Willie Crew getting the Lifetime Achievement Award, Hall of Fame Award 2019 for Retail Council of Canada. It was a great interview. Willie and I sat down at Store 2019 in the Purolator podcast studio, and we did this great interview, so I put a link there. But if you're listening at home, just go into my archives, and a couple of months ago you can see an interview, or listen to an interview I did with Willie. Everlane needs to open stores because basically no online companies are profitable. That from CNBC, quote from Everlane. So we see this continued integration of stores and .com. Loblaw talking about how they're transforming grocery with technology, again from the grocery shop event in Vegas, and Instacart as well, chatting about these exact same things. All right, so that is a wrap on this edition of the Voice of Retail podcast. If you like this podcast, you can subscribe on Apple iTunes or your favorite podcast platform. Please rate and review, and be sure and recommend to a friend or colleague in the retail industry. I'm Michael LeBlanc, founder and president of ME LeBlanc Company, Inc., and you can learn more about me on www.meleblanc.co or, of course, on LinkedIn. Until next time, have a great week.